I smiled wryly at Deputy O'Riordan's characterisation of the quips and one-liners, because at the start we saw in the gallery a secondary school, and by God, they came into a technical and dry discussion when they came into view. I think they could have done with a few more quips and one-liners, if I'm quite honest, and fair play to them for sticking it as long as they could. So I would both agree and disagree with Deputy O'Riordan in terms of the value of the pre-legislative scrutiny process. And I don't serve on this committee, so I haven't had the benefit of hearing it discussed in the level of detail as people who are on the committee would have done. But I do think some very good work happens at that committee stage, pre-legislative scrutiny, but I don't think this bill is entirely blind to the work that the committee did at the pre-legislative scrutiny stage. And I think what we're seeing at second stage is improved as a result of that committee work. And also there is committee stage to come. It's a bill that has a road to travel. I would disagree as well with Deputy O'Riordan's characterisation of this government always being on the side of the employer. I just kind of scribbled a few notes from memory as he was speaking. I mean, under this government, we've introduced sick leave for the first time. We have domestic violence leave, increased parental leave, a right to request remote working, and I know probably tomorrow at this stage we'll see the second stage of the work-life balance bill. So I'm not sure I can agree with that characterisation. I think there's been a range of rights introduced that favour workers and favour employees by this government, and that's something that I'm proud of. I would acknowledge the work and the thankless work of the officials in the department on this bill. It's a very substantial piece of work, and I do acknowledge the huge amount of work that must have gone into it. One of the recurring phrases that I see in describing this bill is talking about agility and flexibility. And that is 100% required in an economy where we are struggling to get people who have the appropriate range of skills. I'll have some specific examples later in the speech, but I do sometimes worry that phrases like agility and flexibility can lead to a bonfire of regulations. So we need to make sure that that we have to be responsive in terms of supplying the labour market. And we know the challenges that we have across a range of sectors. Housing is the one that particularly jumps out to me, the likes of retrofitting, the rollout of solar panels, the green economy, all those things that I, as a Green Party representative, would be interested in pushing forward. It is so difficult to recruit the required skill sets into those areas at the moment. But we can't allow that to happen by undermining workers' rights. It can't be a case that we allow people to just come into this jurisdiction and undermine, for example, the rights of collective bargaining that have been fought for so long by unions and so on. So we do need to strike that balance. Now, I do think this bill goes towards striking that balance, but we need to be careful about it. And yes, we need that flexibility. Yes, we need to move away from a preponderance of provisions in primary legislation so that we can do things through regulation or secondary legislation to be more responsive. But we have to make sure that the rights of workers are protected in that. I did say I was going to reference a specific example, and I suppose it shows a good example of where we need the type of flexibility, where we have skills shortages within our economy. I've had a local company in contact with me, and they want to bring in 20 bus drivers. Now, HGV drivers, that's been resolved. We can bring in HGV drivers. I have 20 bus drivers who are looking to come in, qualified bus drivers, fluent in English, used to driving on the left-hand side of the road. Very important if you're trying to recruit a driver into your economy. But we still have issues around that kind of responsiveness. So this is where this bill comes in. We do want to be able to identify those sectors where we want to bring people in. But we have to make sure that we do that in the right way. And I would say we could look at the likes of the fisheries industry, and we know that there has been problems there, that the workers have been recruited under practices that we might not be comfortable. We have to acknowledge that increased vulnerability of migrant workers who come here under seasonal employment. We need to make sure that those people are afforded the type of protections that I would expect to be in place in my economy. And I would say we have to acknowledge as well that I suppose the labour shortages that we're seeing are a function of a very well-performing economy. And I do note in particular with interest the increased participation of women within our workforce. Something that was unexpected, and it is largely to do with that, the possibility to request remote and flexible working practices. And that's very positive as long as we have those inbuilt protections. But it is very positive that we have an economy that's performing that well. I would like to take the opportunity just to mention platform working, and I know Deputy O'Reilly has engaged with SIPTU on this. I know Senator Sherlock has engaged with SIPTU on this as well. They're very difficult to reach sector of the workforce, and not just in this jurisdiction. All across the EU, we're struggling to adapt our legislation to account for something that's not quite employment and certainly isn't quite self-employment either. And very often they are migrant workers, they're from a different jurisdiction, they might be here on a student visa and are doing some working. So they're difficult to reach, but they definitely need to be protected. And the last point that I would make on this piece of legislation, Minister, is, okay, these employments can be issued to those whose skills are required in a state where those skills are in critical short supply, and that shortage is likely to hinder growth and economic opportunity. And it's that growth and economic opportunity piece that I just want to dwell on for a moment, because maybe those aren't the only factors that we want to consider. Maybe there's room for things like reaching our climate targets. So I suppose I referenced those specific skills, but is there scope for that? And it also chimes with the idea that maybe we should be looking at a TRIPS waiver for intellectual property on technology to fight climate change, for example, climate carbon and storage. I know that's not quite to the point, but I'm saying that growth and economic development, maybe that's slightly too confined a criteria for us to be considering these working permits.